Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here this morning. I'm Amy Barish. I'm the Executive Director at Her Justice, and I really want to thank Cravath for hosting us here this morning with this excellent breakfast. We usually offer bagels, so we're very excited to have Bagels Plus at the law firm. And also to our Junior Advisory Board, many of whom are here this morning. This is an event jointly hosted by our organization and the Junior Advisory Board. As most of you probably know, Her Justice is a nonprofit, and we serve women living in poverty across the city in the areas of family, matrimonial, and immigration law. We give them free legal services, thanks to many of you in this room, because we have a relatively small legal staff, and what we do is we train and mentor volunteer attorneys from firms like Cravath to help women with these issues. This morning's breakfast briefing is one in a series that we actually started on the day of the presidential inauguration, which we cleverly called the inaugural breakfast briefing. And that first breakfast briefing was really our attempt to talk about what we anticipated might change in the legal lives of our clients with the new administration. And we were just saying yesterday that we wanted to go back to what we had prognosticated then to see if we were right. My guess is that we were less imaginative than perhaps we needed to have been. So this breakfast briefing, in a way, follows up on that. One of the issues we talked about was immigration then, so we're talking today about what's going on at the border. And it's important to us at Her Justice because it really impacts the daily lives of our clients. It certainly impacts the daily lives of our immigration attorneys, and the climate of concern, fear, and confusion that spreads among all of the individuals we serve in the city. Her Justice is celebrating its 25th anniversary, so we're beyond our adolescence and into young adulthood, and we've served thousands of clients. We reach about 3,500 women every year. So after 25 years, we realize we know some things, and as I like to say, the plural of anecdote is data. We're starting to really mine that data and get a better understanding for what it is we know, and one of the things we know is that we have a lot of expertise in our agency. And obviously, there's a lot of expertise among our partner agencies. So the breakfast briefings is really an attempt to bring that together, to let us talk about some of the important issues of our day that we talk a lot about in the office, but we want to talk about with you as well. So I think that's really all I am going to say. I am not an expert in immigration, so I'm going to sit down and listen to our experts in immigration, and starting off with Hamra Ahmed, who is our legal director. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. So thank you all for coming. Before I introduce our panelists, I'm just going to take a few minutes to share some other developments and updates to help frame the discussion, because there's been a lot going on. I also wanted to draw your attention to the note cards on your chairs, so we will be reserving time for questions at the end. So if you have questions, feel free to write them down, and then we'll have staff collect the questions, and then I'll be sure to address as many as we can towards the end. I also just wanted to mention that some of what will be shared about what's going on at the border may be emotionally triggering, and so just to make you aware of that. It's a difficult topic. So as you know, the crisis that we're currently facing in this country with regards to immigration is a result of executive orders and decisions and a stated policy to limit immigration in the United States, both for people entering our borders and for those immigrants already within the country seeking relief. This has created an atmosphere of confusion and fear for our clients and all immigrants, and uncertainty that we are rapidly trying to respond to in the best way that we can. But the hits just keep on coming. And so in the last week alone, there were new memos that will significantly change the way that we advise clients and assess clients for relief. There are four issues that I wanted to highlight. The first you may be aware of. About a month ago, Attorney General Sessions issued a decision in the matter of AB that essentially reversed protections for victims of domestic violence fleeing abuse in their home countries, and practically making it impossible to seek relief in that particular social group category. And my panelists will go into a little bit more detail about that. And while it may not affect clients directly, we've been responding to clients who either have asylum or have other forms of relief who think that this may impact them. And so this, compounded with other news stories, has again created confusion and fear. The second policy memo or a decision that has come to light is a proposed change in the way that our government interprets public charge. And that's relevant because there are certain categories of immigrants who are here legally with status who are entitled to apply for public benefits, including those that we represent, victims of domestic violence, who need it to get back on their feet. The proposed change would make them more vulnerable to either losing their status and or risking their status when they apply for naturalization. And the uncertainty of that, because it's a proposed memo, again, leaves us questioning how we should advise our clients. Yes, you need public benefits. At this current time, you are entitled to them, and it will not hurt you. That may change. And so you can imagine the challenge in trying to assess and make sense of some of these proposed changes. The third policy memo, just released this past week, has to do with removal proceedings and how the government issues notices to appear, which is the document which initiates removal. The government has implemented a new policy, which will go into effect later this fall, that anybody who has a denied application for relief before the Immigration Service may now be at risk for being placed in removal proceedings. Our current policy is that if you apply, and many of you in the audience are attorneys who've worked on our cases, for a valid self-petition or a U visa, and you have no other criminal background or are not a risk, your case would be denied, and that would be the end of it. But now the policy would be that immigration officers would be referring people for removal proceedings. So they've been given the directive that if someone's application is denied, and at the time that they have been denied, they don't have status, they must be placed in removal proceedings. So, of course, that has an impact on people assessing whether they should apply and assessing their risks, but also a consideration for the already overburdened immigration removal system in the courts, who already had court dates well into the 2020s. Compounding that challenge is the other policy memo that was released last week, which has to do with requests for evidence or notices of intent to deny. So simply put, when you apply for an application with immigration and they feel that your application is lacking in some way, that you haven't met the threshold, they will send you a letter that says, we need more evidence, or we're likely to deny unless you get us these things. They no longer have to do that. And so they could outright deny an application, which again, compounded with the previous memo, puts clients at greater risk. And that changes the way that we do our own cases and mentor pro bono attorneys in the preparation of those applications because the risk is greater. So now turning to the crisis at the border. So as you know, back in April, the administration implemented a zero tolerance policy prosecuting criminally those who enter the United States, including those who, pursuant to international and U.S. law, are seeking asylum in the United States. And as a result of that, families, because they're being criminally prosecuted, are being separated. So children were in detention. As a result of a lawsuit brought by the ACLU, a federal judge issued an injunction requiring the administration to reunite all the children by certain dates, given their age groups. The first group were children under 5, and they were to have been returned to their families by last Tuesday. And as of today, only 50% of those children have been returned. And while the deadline for the remaining children is next week, only 1% of those children have been returned. And that's compounded and is really a reflection of the lack of planning on how they were separated in the first place, which complicates how they are being returned. And we don't have those answers yet. So to share more about what's going on and what's being done now in response to this crisis, we are joined by 3 experts in the field. So in the interest of time, I'm going to keep the introductions brief. Bios are available for you as well. Camille Mcclure is the Director of Immigration Legal Policy at the New York Immigration Coalition, where she works crafting New York Immigration Coalition policies and a whole host of other issues. And you may recognize her name from her response to the first executive order travel ban in January of last year, where she played a huge role in coordinating and organizing the attorney response at the airports. And she's busy at it again with the response to this latest change on the local response, and specifically in Albany, and she'll speak more to that. After Camille, Amanda Doroshow, a staff attorney with Her Justice, who mentors many of you in the audience on complex immigration matters, will share her experiences as she's volunteered twice at the detention center in Dilley, Texas, working with women and children who were seeking protection and asylum here in the United States, as well as volunteering just yesterday at the Albany Prison Project with Camille in response to this current crisis. And after Amanda, Ron Richter, who is CEO of the JCCA. It's an organization that helps abused, neglected, and traumatized children heal. They have 37 different programs, and he is a former family court judge and former deputy commissioner of ACS here in New York City. We'll speak to the trauma that the children are suffering, the non-legal issues that we're grappling with, that the children are grappling with. And he wrote an opinion piece that was published about 2 weeks ago entitled "What the Trump Administration Can Do Now to Mitigate Immigrant Children's Emotional Trauma," and that article is also available just outside. So with that, I'll turn it over to Camille, who will share what has been the local response to the family separation crisis.
Thank you, Hammer, and thank you all. It's wonderful to be here today. So after we also, in the wake of the election, as legal service providers, brought together a group of lawyers into a room and felt we needed a strategy session. For those of you who don't know, the New York Immigration Coalition, we're a member-based organization. We represent about 200 organizations and allies and partners who work with immigrants throughout New York State, such as Her Justice. And so my job as a recovering immigration lawyer, although not so recovering, a little bit more in the weeds again these days, is to work with all of our members who provide legal services to craft policy around access to justice and access to counsel. And so we had a legal strategy session. We had a doomsday forecasting scenario, much like you all did, and we decided to create a collaborative of legal service providers. Now, the decision to have this meeting happened after the election, but it was scheduled for the second week of February. So in between happened JFK, and it really showed us the power of lawyers as, honestly, first responders, because that's what it was at JFK, and that's what it is right now in Albany. So we've been working together and trying to create connections between legal service providers, especially, in New York City, strengthening the connections that are in New York City, but also figuring out ways to export that knowledge and that depth of expertise and resources into more under-resourced parts of the state. And man, am I glad we did that, because about a month ago, on June 14th, if we're going to be precise, I was with a good friend of mine who is a law professor at Albany Law School when she got a phone call from the Albany County Sheriff telling us that for the next 6 weeks, he had been told by ICE to expect about 30 to 40 transfers into his jail. Now, this isn't unusual. Albany County Jail has been used on and off to house ICE detainees. They don't have a contract with ICE. ICE piggybacks on a marshal's contract. But that is the case. And so Sarah, my law professor friend who has been sending her students to screen, was like, okay, this is a bit of a higher volume. Let's get the lawyers involved. So that first week, we got about 35 people, all had deportations orders already, appeals pending, transferred from the detention facility in Batavia. We figured we got this. And then the next week, apparently in the middle of the night, ICE went and grabbed 100 people from the border. I don't even think they cared who. They just grabbed them. I don't think they knew who they were because they forgot to grab their paperwork. Put them on a plane and sent them to Albany. Didn't tell them where they were going. Put them back in the clothes they had arrived in at the border. Sent them here. And then 2 days later, they did it again. And then a week later, they did it again. So now we have 300 individuals in the Albany County Jail who have no idea where New York is, who have no idea where their families are. They were traveling with their families. Who have no idea what's going on. Many of them, it appears, were criminally prosecuted at the border, at least those who actually attempted to enter between the ports of entry, but they don't know. They don't know their A numbers, which for those of you who have done immigration know is basically your file number that follows you everywhere you go in immigration. It's like your social security number. They don't know their A numbers. They don't have their paperwork. Many of them were made to sign paperwork, but then ICE told them to throw it in the trash. And they don't know what's happening, and they don't know what's going on. And the sheriff, who I've never said these words in my life before, but the sheriff has been an incredible partner. And he called Sarah and he said, we need to help these people. And Sarah said, yes. And she turned to me. She said, want to help? And I said, sure. So for the last few weeks, we've been running a project at the Albany County Jail, bringing in volunteer lawyers from all over the state, tapping into these deep networks that we've been spending 18 months creating, to assist these individuals. And at first they were very scared and they didn't understand who we were and they thought we were part of the government. But little by little, we've been gaining their trust and the word's getting out there, and we've been able to give them orientations. We've been able to screen their cases. We've been able to intervene. There's been some pretty serious issues, some health crises. We've been able to locate family members. Now we have 18 individuals who are separated in some way, shape, or form from a family member: parent, spouse, adult children, brother, sibling, or minor children. We have 7 parents who are separate right now. We know of. We've had 7 parents separated from children. None of them fall under the ACLU class. So we're trying to figure out what to do there. Our model is very much based on what Amanda will be discussing at Dilley in terms of how we're leveraging the volunteer resources. But what it really feels like is that ICE was planning for a big event at the border, the detention of families in high volumes. So they just decided to clean house and grab 300 people and shove them in a closet so that no one would notice the mess, and we're the closet. But we've been making our way through it. We're confronting the same issues we confronted at the border. The border very legitimately has now moved to New York. We have 2 borders in New York, the northern one and the southern one. ICE is making threats. They're trying to be intimidating. They're trying to prevent our access to our clients. They're trying to interfere with our ability to provide legal representation. And it's been so critical to have attorneys come and volunteer. And in a way, we sort of, I don't want to use the words lucked out, because that's obviously the very wrong way, but with so much interest for individuals going at the border, that the groups at the border don't have any more volunteer opportunities, that energy in many ways has been refocused on us, and we're so incredibly grateful for that. And to me, who's been working for 5.5 years since I joined the coalition to try to create these networks between lawyers and really seeing that come to fruition over the last 1.5 years, where I've seen these lawyers, these immigration lawyers, work like no one, like never before. They're talking, they're sharing, they're supporting each other, we're laughing together, we're crying together. It's been really amazing. But the other really gratifying part is seeing individuals like you who have come in and jumped in, no questions asked. At JFK was a mess. In Albany, it is a mess because it's disaster relief. Things change every single day. We have an opponent that's trying to literally pull the rug out from underneath us, but everyone has been so great and just rolling with it, pitching in, doing what's needed, and it's just been really inspiring to watch. So my pitch to all of you is to come to Albany, New York, or to take a pro bono case, or whatever. You don't have to have immigration expertise. There are great groups like Her Justice that do amazing mentoring. Everyone I know, I haven't gone a single day in the 3 weeks we've been at Albany without a lawyer from a firm who's been up there through their pro bono networks who hasn't called me and said, I want to take the case I worked on. They're all just so incredibly touched by the stories that they're hearing, and we're finding ways to facilitate that. You have to remember that in immigration, you're not allowed a lawyer. So every time you touch a person's case and every time you touch a person's life, that's not the only person you're fighting for. You're fighting for every single other person in that same situation who doesn't have access to a lawyer, who doesn't happen to have been moved to the middle of nowhere, New York. Okay, I should say the middle of nowhere, New York. It is the state capital. It's not New York City. No one quote me upstate saying that. But they've been moved. I mean, we were drawing maps on legal paths to show them where they were. And so for every single person who's in this jail, where we have the luck to have a sheriff who's been so willing and pissing ICE off doing it, who's been working with us just across the river in Rensselaer County, there's a sheriff who signed a 287G agreement to deputize, which means that ICE agents have come in, trained his staff, and deputized them as immigration enforcement, who has immigration detainees in his jail and won't give us any information, tells us to show up to public hearings, and when we ask, he says he can't answer the question. So for every single person you're fighting there, you're fighting for all of them. We're exploring litigation on a lot of these cases. We're gonna come back every way we can, because they moved the border to New York, and we're gonna show them what New York's really about. So I hope that you can all join us in some way, shape, or form. I ask your patience as we're figuring things out. You may be there to do a CFI prep. You may be there to barge into court and defend someone, but we'll train you first. You may be there to hold somebody's hand as they have to go through a medical emergency, and we have to figure out what the best way is to get them out. But either way, anyway, whatever you do, we'll be very, very grateful. And thank you for this opportunity to talk about it here today.
I'm sure we'll have more questions for you, Camille, towards the end. Amanda, could you share some of your experiences both at Dilley and then the Albany Prison Project?
Sure. So
Again, thank you also for having me. Before I want to talk about kind of the family detention centers at the border, I want to kind of just explain to you my experience just yesterday. I got back last night at the Albany jail, and this was my first time there. And I think, you hear these words of immigration detainees, jail, but to see it with your own eyes is something that's really intense and breathtaking. So, for example, the woman I met with yesterday was a grandmother. She came in a jumpsuit. She was patted down before she could meet with me, and she was the sweetest woman. She is leaving severe. She's really afraid to return to her home country. She has the legal right to be applying for asylum, and she said to me, I remember her saying, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother. My whole life, all I do is take care of my family. I go to church and I work. I never in my life thought I would be in a prison. And so to give kind of a picture of what that means of immigrant detainees being held in a jail, it's really heartbreaking to see. So I wanted to speak with you a little bit about family detention, because one thing to note is detention and family separation isn't a new thing that just started this spring. This has been going on for years, started under the Obama administration. There are three main family detention centers in the U.S. The first one is in Karnes, Texas. The second one is in Dilley, Texas, which are both very small towns. And then there's also one in Pennsylvania. The one that I've been to multiple times is called the South Texas Family Residential Center. It's in the town called Dilley, Texas, and it is the largest of the three detention centers. So it has, I think, over 2,000 beds, and it was opened in 2014 under the Obama administration, and it is run by a private corporation called Core Civic. And so what this means is immigration contracts with a private corporation to run these detention centers. So as a result, detention is a multi-billion-dollar industry now. The project I volunteered for is called the Cara Family Detention Project, or I think now they also go by the Dilley Pro Bono Project. And this is an amazing project, which, like Camille said, the structure of it has been brought to Albany and brought to New York. So how it really works is volunteers come from all over the country for a week at a time to help represent the women and children detained. And so when I was there, each time I was with about 10 to 15 advocates from all over the country, may it be attorneys, paralegals, interpreters. One time we even had an anthropologist, law students. You come on a Sunday, you have your orientation, and then you work representing the women and children all week until you leave on Friday, and then the next group of volunteers come. So what's really important about this is there is an on-the-ground team of about 6 people that help facilitate and organize the representation, but it's really the volunteers that keep this project running. And without this project, there would be likely no legal assistance for the women and children detained. The people that are detained, as I said, are women and children. Majority of the women and children detained at the South Texas Family Residential Center are from the Northern Triangle countries in Central America. So that's El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. However, there are women and children from all over. I met people from family from Syria, Cuba, Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico, Haiti, from all over. Everyone in the detention center is seeking asylum. And majority of the claims are they're like gender-based claims. They're fleeing gender-based violence or gang violence in their home country. So what we do in the project, I kind of broke it down into 3 categories. And the first is preparing clients for their credible fear interview. So what that is basically, in the long, lengthy process to apply for asylum, this is the first step. You have to go before an asylum officer, tell your story, and you have to show a 10% likelihood that you could prevail in your case. If you get a positive decision, then you should be released from detention, hopefully. It's not always, but hopefully with an ankle bracelet, and then you would be able to apply for asylum and fight your case. So really this we call a CFI, preps, credible fear interviews. This is the first step to just even get the opportunity to apply for asylum. And so it's really, so for example, I guess to say, if I was detained, say I came from Mexico and I was detained and I was planning on coming to New York to live with my sister, I would first have to pass this credible fear interview. Then I would be released to New York so I could go before a judge and apply for asylum and fight my case. So it's a really, really hard process. So for example, the first time I was there, I met with a woman who had been raped 3 weeks ago and had never spoken to anyone about what happened. She just fled because she was afraid for her life. And so when I had to meet with her with the credible fear interview, I had to prepare her. I had about an hour and a half to prepare her to go into this interview. To give context, generally, if I'm working with a client who's experienced such trauma, I'll work weeks, if not months, with the client to gain trust. And I'll also have other support services there for her, like therapists, counseling, so that she can go in and fight her case. But that's a luxury that she does not have when she's detained. She has an hour to just meet me, to go tell another person, a stranger, her story in a compelling way for them to give her the opportunity to apply for asylum. The next big thing we did is something called Know Your Rights, which I thought was really important. And so there were 3 Know Your Rights where you kind of explain information. The first is once you're upon detention, kind of what is going on, where are you in the process, what's happening. The second Know Your Rights we did was about the credible fear interview and what to expect, what is it. And then the last is a release Know Your Rights of, okay, what are the next steps, what do you need to know, here are legal resources to help you find a lawyer. And I thought this component was really important because, as Camille said, no one has any idea about their rights. No one has any idea about this complicated process, what's going on. If people have information, it's wrong generally because it's based on rumors, or immigration themselves have told them the wrong information. So I think when you meet with these women, you can see they're so hungry for just any information so they can make informed decisions for their lives. And then finally, the last component of the project is advocacy. As you may have seen in the news, the conditions in these detention centers are not good. And so it's a lot of advocacy to make sure people are being treated the way they should be. So if they get the medical care they need, or if they're missing medicine, or so be it. So for example, the second time I was there, I met a 6-year-old that was raped, and her mother called the police, and that's why they had to flee, because now their lives are in danger. And since the incident, the little girl could not stop urinating herself, and she had yet to see a doctor. So that's a process that the project was intervened in to make sure this little girl got the medical support that she needed. One other thing about the Dilley, Texas, and the town is the water in the town is undrinkable due to fracking. So when I first got there, I was told, do not drink the water. You cannot drink the water. Even the employees at the detention center told me that they would never drink the water. But the water is given to all of the women and children. And as a result, everyone is unbelievably sick. They're vomiting, they have diarrhea, and it's really horrible. So much so that one time when I was there, we found a 4-year-old unconscious that passed out because of dehydration. So I see everyone's faces, and I can see like the horror in your faces, which I'm sorry to put a damper to start your day, but I think it's really important to understand kind of the visual of what this means by detaining people, detaining families. I personally feel that upon detention, and when someone is detained, it's traumatic in itself, the process of being detained, and that this most crucial point in someone's life when they need the most support and the most access to legal resources, this is when they're the most isolated. So I'm going to give another plug, because we luckily now can go on a 2.5 bus ride and really help people being detained and separated from their families. Thank you.
All right, a moment for all of us. So Ron, would you please speak to a little bit of your background and kind of what prompted the article, which I thought was so beautifully written and heartfelt, and some of the, where do you begin talking about the needs of these traumatized children?
Sure. So good morning, and thank you for having me. I am not an immigration specialist and have not practiced immigration law, but what compelled me to become involved in this issue is really threefold. The first is that my agency, which is JCCA, formerly the Jewish Child Care Association, has an agreement with the Office of Refugee Resettlement to care for up to 30 children here in New York who require long-term foster care. And I'll explain what that means. Second, I have spent almost 30 years working in New York City's child welfare and juvenile justice system in various roles. About 14 of those years was representing children at the Legal Aid Society through their juvenile rights practice. and then in various roles in city government and state government, 4.5 sitting as a family court judge in Queens, which, as most of you know, is the crossroads of immigration, and more than 50 languages are spoken in the Queens Family Court. I sat in both a family violence part and a child protective part. And then I did a couple of stints at New York City's Administration for Children's Services. I was a deputy commissioner, and then at the last 2.5 years of the Bloomberg administration, I was the commissioner of Children's Services. So I've seen the plight of New York City's most vulnerable children and families from many vantage points, and so that really drew me in to this horrifying implementation of public policy. And then, if you have time to read this opinion piece in USA Today, I ultimately, learned later in life, really when I was a family court judge, that my father's own story of being separated from his mother as a result of the Nazi invasion of Belgium when he was 11 was really probably why I ended up in this business in the first place. And so the constellation of those factors prompted me to become focused on the impact on this separation of what I consider our kids at the U.S. border. I think it's ironic that after years and years of advocacy by children and family advocates, we have just passed under this Congress and this president signed something known as the Families First Act, which a lot of us have been pushing for many years, which actually for the first time advances the critical importance of prevention in child welfare policy in the United States, and gives states an opportunity to have more flexibility in supporting preventive services dollars so that we can actually work in jurisdictions to help families stay together in child welfare situations as opposed to putting children in foster care, which is something that we all think had to have. Obviously, we all across the country felt was very important, and that just happened. And so to see this zero tolerance policy result in the separation of children is just pretty shocking to those of us who work in child welfare. I think that from the child's perspective, it is important to think about, as my colleague was reflecting upon the grandmother that she just spoke to. Many of these children have traveled very long distances, fearful about what they might confront, and they were with their parent during that scary trip, not knowing and escaping very dangerous circumstances. And to come to the border after all of that trek and arrive expecting to remain with their parents, obviously, and be separated from their parent abruptly, from what I understand, without really any information about where they were going or what would happen to their parents, is an extraordinary trauma for children to experience. Those children were then sent to distances on various forms of transportation to locations where in many cases they were sheltered with lots of other children in initially pretty chaotic circumstances because of the volume of the children, and were often in settings where their language may not have been spoken and where they were with strange adults. And that is really upsetting and traumatic. And unless there's sort of an immediate response to help children, know that their parents are okay, B, give them some indication of how long it's going to be before they communicate or see their parents, begins to create lasting trauma for those kids. Because even if they eventually are reunited with their parents, brain development in early childhood and through adolescence is critical. And you are really creating damage to children when they don't know where their parents are. A psychiatrist friend of mine in child and adolescent psychiatry said that for children, being with their parent is like breathing. And I am left to think often about what we have created here in the United States, especially in states like New York, to protect the integrity of the family unit. It is a constitutional right for parents and children to be together. And over the course of the past 20 years, we have worked really hard to ensure that judges can't simply remove a child from their parent. In fact, in New York, we have a case called Nicholson v. Scopetta, in which it requires a family court judge to consider the trauma to a child and to a parent before we can remove. So we need to think about what this is going to do, and yet our federal government has removed children without even apparently writing down where the parent and the child are going to be and how there is an actual connection between them, so much so that our federal government acknowledged that we needed to do DNA testing to prove that there was a connection between the parents and the children. And you've all heard the reference to when you take a flight, they actually do give you a ticket for your luggage so that they can find it. So it's an appalling government action. I don't know what else to say without, using words I shouldn't use publicly. My concern, obviously from a children's advocacy vantage point, is what can be going on right now. And in my piece, I point to a couple of things that what can be and should be going on based upon the technology that we use right now. When, any one of if you have children and you're on a business trip, or if your parents don't live near you and they have grandchildren, what are all of the things that you're doing to make sure that your little kid's face is in front of you and your face is in front of your child's every day that you are gone, right? I went up to Saratoga last week for work, and every day I was in touch with my little girl and I sent her pictures of where I was, and obviously, she and I were in constant contact. And these little children have been stripped of that so that in their minds there's something wrong with them and there's something wrong with their parents, and they have been in some way stigmatized internally that they're bad. And I don't have to, we don't have to look too deeply into American history to say that we have done this repeatedly with people who come from other places and people who are brown and black. This is what we do as a country, and it is being done again. Even as the Statue of Liberty is just a mile or two away, right? Our country is built on the contributions of immigrants. So, I could go on. I won't. I will say that this is contrary to all of the laws that we've developed that that are the infrastructure that scaffold the importance of parent-child relationships, and there are a multitude of federal and state laws that ensure that the integrity of family is supported. And so this U.S. policy is contrary to everything that we stand for. And I'm, very satisfied by what the judge is doing in California, and feel strongly that there needs to be consistent relief and very careful relief requested to extract from the federal government as much information as possible, and specific orders with respect to the nature of the contact that should be happening between these little kids and adolescent kids and their parents, because the longer that separation occurs and the less information the children in particular have, the more damage our government is doing to them.
Thank you. We have plenty of time for questions. I have several of my own, but I definitely want to engage the audience. I'm sure you have questions as well. So perhaps as people, and you don't necessarily need to use the note cards. If you have them, you can pass them up, or feel free to raise your hand. We're a small enough group. So as we do that, I guess my first question would be, what's next, to the extent that we can anticipate based on what's been happening? What do we know through the grapevine or anticipated policy changes that are coming? And then how do we anticipate? And then what would be the proposed plan and response? I guess I could open that up to Camille and then Amanda.
Easy one. So I've been working in immigration law for 15 years. I was in private practice before I joined the NYC 5 years ago. And I think that's one thing I've learned is to never ask what's next. Because things change so much and so fast, right? Immigration is shaped by policy and it's shaped by case law. Congress clearly has no say in any of this because they're not doing anything to change the laws that we've had since 1965. But there you have these two dual tracks of policy coming out of the executive branch and case law coming out of the judiciary. And we've really seen that play out in this administration, right? Where it's like January 27th, Muslim ban, February 2nd, and nationwide injunction, and everything that happened in between. And that's a pattern that we've seen over and over and over and over again. And, look at what happened with DACA. DACA, we talk a lot about the family separation stuff, but what happened with DACA, it's staying, it's going, it's staying, it's going, it's going. A judge is saying it's staying. Now we're weeks away from probably having dueling injunctions at a time when our Supreme Court is down one justice and out until October. And for the DACA recipients, talking about mental health issues, that's been dramatic. So I don't know what's next is the answer to your question, Hammer, unfortunately. And I don't think we can predict it. I don't think in my worst moments of the days after the election, when we were all so shocked, right? When we were all so shocked and we were so bruised from the campaign and from everything that happened during the campaign, and we were sort of doomsday forecasting as we all seem to be, I don't think we imagined ripping children out of their arms. And we haven't talked about how it happens, but it is traumatic. And I'm not going to talk about it now because there's no vodka in that orange juice. I think for me, I don't know if Amanda, you have a different way of approaching it, but for me, you just focus on the problem in front of you, right? You focus on the client in front of you. You focus on the policy issue in front of you. You just see what's broken and you start fixing it and you shut out the noise. You just have to. Because I don't think I could go to work every morning if I really thought about the broader context of it. There will be a time for that. There will be a time to sit back and look and think like, oh my God, what did we just live through? To me at least, maybe this is how I deal with it. I don't know. So how do we prepare for it? We don't. You just wake up in the morning, look at what you have to do, fill out your timesheet, punch ice, shut down a detention center, whatever. And you just focus on that. And tomorrow we'll have another problem, and maybe we'll be running a law office out of, I don't know, where we haven't run a law office out of at this point. Airports, jails. I think a roadside diner is coming up next. But we'll do it because we know how to do it. That's the other thing. We know how to do it now. And we're ready. It actually really took me by surprise how much setting up this project in Albany was muscle memory from JFK and from having volunteered in Dilley as well. And it was just, there was no thought. There was like, okay, we need this, we need that, we need that. It was just like, how do I know how to do this? Never mind, do it. And so I think that's how we get through it.
Yeah, I agree
Punching
with
it to you.
Camille. I think that's really the only way to survive because just as everything comes, like scream if you have to, take a deep breath and then regroup. Okay, how do we move forward? But I think one thing I'm noticing the trend is all of these changes in policies and decisions, it's all leaning toward, it's resulting in violations of due process, right, which people are entitled to. And so I think that's what's so compelling to me is, okay, I went to school and I'm trained to fight for this. And so I'm going to do what I can one person at a time to the extent that I can do it. And I think it's really important. You don't necessarily have to be an immigration lawyer. Yes, immigration law is complex and it's confusing, and especially asylum law, but you can learn that. But as an attorney, you went to school and your mind is trained to think the way that it needs to think to help people at this time. And so, sorry, I kind of focused on that, exactly what she said. Okay, I learned these skills and I'm just going to do one thing at a time as much as I can do it. Yeah.
So I am going to be grandiose and say that many people are drawing comparisons between our current administration and other very dangerous despots in the brilliant approach that President Trump is using to convince Americans of the dangers of people who come from other places. And his popularity is not waning. He is as popular as ever with his base. And some would argue that his base is growing. And some would argue that he's going to do just fine in the midterm elections. And it's not as though we haven't seen this in the past century, because we have. And we've seen a lot of people sort of just go along with it. And so while we're up in arms right here in New York City, and I'm sure they're up in arms in LA, and I imagine Chicago is up in arms, and my guess is there are some folks in Miami who are up in arms, I'm going to be out of cities soon. And so I think when you ask about next steps, the next steps are for us to take this very seriously, because this form of leadership is extremely dangerous. And you've all pointed out the progression that we are involved in. And how long has he been president? It's not been that long. It really hasn't been that long. And, you know, my dad, who is alive and who is almost 90, talks about a sort of distinction between the way Europeans today get out into the streets and march and rally and are far more vociferous in their opposition than we tend to be. We still like our reality TV. And President Trump was a really popular reality TV star. And I don't think that we should underestimate his influence on the way we as Americans like to think. And so in terms of next steps, I think we really have to look at the way that he has brilliantly convinced people of his way and figure out how to undermine that propaganda machine. Because we have seen propaganda used with much less technology less than 100 years ago. Effectively, very effectively. So that's as grandiose as I'm going to get. But people are reading about that. There are books being written about this very topic.
So we have a question there, and then there, and then here. Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for the work that you do. I don't know if I could do that every day, but it's definitely inspiring. So two related questions. What legal action, if any, is being taken regarding the tainted water, and also regarding the Rensselaer County Sheriff who's limiting contact with the detainees?
So I can answer both. Unless you want to answer the water.
The question also is being recorded.
Sorry. So there's two questions, which is what's being done about the water in Dilley that was compromised by fracking, and the other is what's being done about the Rensselaer County Sheriff. So the first question is that there have been hearings on it. There has been testing done. It's been inconclusive. If you go there and you open a tap, you smell the sulfur. Like, there's no doubt that this, and people are getting sick from it. So there's no doubt that the water is compromised. But without getting too much into the weeds, Dilley requires a child care license. to be able to detain children for as long as it does under the Flores Agreement, which you've heard a lot about in the news recently. And the child care license was denied, and for years there was litigation, and there's a lot of public hearings around it, and the issue of the water came up at that time, and it was tested, and it was found to be inconclusive whether it was actually toxic or not. So I think The Intercept might have done a piece on it. I'm not sure what the current state of it is. I think it's just sort of an accepted fact at this point. It sounds awful, but if you go there, it's not the biggest issue you're going to be dealing with. And I think that's unfortunately the case, right? Which isn't a great answer. I'm sorry. The Rensselaer County Sheriff, we put a lot of pressure on him when he reached out to when he signed up for a 287G agreement last year. He's been unmoved because immigrants. So two things. First of all, immigrants never have a right to a lawyer, at least not a free lawyer. They have the right to a lawyer at their own expense, but the government is under no obligation to facilitate that. Second of all, no one has a right to a lawyer at the border, and for those who've been transferred from the border, even though they're not at the border, they're still legally speaking at the border. They're still going through the admission process into the United States, and it's very well established case law. It's somewhat established case law. I personally think that it's ripe for a challenge, and I have thought that since JFK, but that you don't have a right to a lawyer, so he's not actually interfering with a right that we've been able to sort of craft. I just found out yesterday that this is happening. We're trying to find out. There are 30 county jails in New York that have some type of contract or agreement that could conceivably let ICE house people there. Most of them are what we call IGAs, intergovernmental agreements, which is what's happening in Albany, where the agreement's actually with a different agency, but ICE has a rider attached to it. So we don't know how many of them have exercised that rider for many places. I suspect not, because they happen to have a field office in Albany, which makes Albany and Rensselaer that much easier for them. Anyways, the short story is we tried the 287G agreement. We tried the pressure. The governor intervened, everyone. But at the end of the day, he's an elected official, and he has the right to enter into such an agreement. And the people, and the people who can do something about it are the voters of Rensselaer County.
Okay, we had a question there. Thanks.
Hi, thank you for you so much for coming today. You have so much important work you're doing, so it feels like we're taking precious moments away from it. So we really appreciate you coming to tell us all about what's going on. So I have two questions. So one question is, I guess with everything going on in this administration, it feels like the world is collapsing every day. So I'm a little bit of your catastrophic mindset. So with what happened yesterday, like the news shifts to the next thing, and then Facebook is all about the next thing. And you're not reading so much about what's going on in the border right now, and with the reunification of children anymore. And it's scary that this kind of dropped from the media right now. So what's kind of going on the ground with Congress and our senators, which again, I'm not really sure what they do anymore. But what's really going on the ground to make change and progress legislation on this front? Like, what are discussions that are being had? You guys can speak to that if you're aware. And how do we, aside from literally getting in the streets in March, and maybe I'm just kind of answering my question and being active for the midterms, do more, give money, etc. The second question is a little bit building on that. I've been following a grassroots movement of women who people may have been reading about in the news. You guys are probably aware. I think they're under the name Immigrant Families Together. Women have been raising money to pay bail for some of these mothers and uniting them with their children, driving them across the country. And I've been donating kind of left and right whenever I see it come up on Facebook. I encourage everyone to do so. How does that work? Like just logistically, why are these bails being set at $30,000? I don't know not that much about it from a legal perspective, but how is this able to happen if apparently these bails used to be like $1,500? Like, what's going on, and is there a cap on all of this at some point?
So I can just clarify something that I said earlier and maybe answer it.
Can you repeat it? Or maybe Hamra, can you repeat the question?
Sure, yes. So there were two questions, and correct me if I'm summarizing them correctly or not. So one, what is being done on the legislative front to counteract or address some of these issues, and then what can we do in addition to just being more active and voting? And the second question is if we are aware of Immigrant Families Together and these other groups that are raising money for bail to release the mothers so they can reunite with their children, and why are bail amounts being set at $30,000, or what is the legal what's the legal rationale for setting bail so high?
So, just as a point of clarification, I said earlier that my agency had an agreement with the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is part of the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. And it's important to explain that that is a contract or agreement, it's called, to take care of unaccompanied alien children. That's just what it's called. And to date, in my agency's case, those are children who have arrived at our border unaccompanied. So they were not with their families or their parent. What my understanding is that the value of those contracts over the course of the past 10 or 12 years have increased from something like $75 million to close to $1 billion. And it's unclear why, other than there would be more unaccompanied alien children arriving at our borders, or there's something else going on. We know that since April, our government has been classifying children who our government has taken away from families once they're taken away as unaccompanied, which is kind of bizarre because they aren't, in fact, unaccompanied. They were accompanied. And then they took them away and used the contracts that ORR had for unaccompanied children and placed them there. That's why you've been reading all about all these children coming to New York has, because of our long social services history, we have a lot of agencies that have much bigger contracts than my agency does for unaccompanied alien children, but they sent them here. They sent them, I'm sure other panelists know where they've been sent more than even New York, but all over the country. So that just is a point of clarification. We've always taken care of unaccompanied alien children, but now they've sort of hodgepodged what that actually means.
I think. You sure? to answer your questions very briefly, bills have been introduced. The Republicans in the Senate introduced a bill to override the Flores settlement to allow for the indefinite detention of children. I should also add as a fine print, because we're all lawyers, that I work for a nonpartisan organization, 501c3, and therefore don't take sides. Just support anyone with pro-immigrant policies. But so they have been, but nothing's really moving. Nobody can agree on lunch orders at this point in Congress, so nothing else. So I think right now we're very firmly into run up to November mode, so I don't expect anything to come out. To your second question, by law, an immigration bond must be $1,500 minimum. It must be posted by a U.S. citizen or green card holder. It can take years to get back, which complicates things anyway. But over the years, we've seen really alarming increases from $1,500 to $5,000. I think it's kind of the norm in Dilley. But our judges here in New York, people in Albany would depend mainly on the Buffalo immigration court. The judges up there routinely set double-digit bonds. But just so you know, so some of that initial batch of individuals we have who are transferred from Batavia and Albany, some of them have bonds for $4,000, $6,000. But when you've come here with literally just a shirt on your back, you can't afford 50 cents, you know? So they have bond and they're still sitting there. And I think, putting my policy hat on, and I actually have a call about this later today, because I think that we are, as an immigration advocacy community, missing the ball in all these conversations around bail reform that are happening right now to not include immigration. And that's something that I personally want to look more into, because I think that we need to be talking about that, and how there's just a much broader context that continues to incarcerate poor people and people of color no matter what. And it's just so glaringly terrible in the immigration. I mean, it's glaringly terrible everywhere. But I mean, when you think of a refugee, right? So.
Also, just to kind of piggyback off of what Camille says, I think kind of what Camille says about how the drastic difference in bonds, it just goes to show how such an important process that's so crucial maybe to someone's life is so arbitrary. So it really depends where you are, what judge you get, or what asylum officer you get. So for example, there are asylum officers that rotate at the Dilley Detention Center, and they kind of have an idea of who they are, but we have no idea who these asylum officers are going to be in Albany, and it could be a completely different game. And they're by phone. They're by phone as well, so it's not even in person. and likely with an interpreter as well, so all by phone. So I think it's just something really important to reiterate that it is really unjust and it is horrible and it's really arbitrary, which with the stakes so high, it's really not okay.
Vanessa.
Are the credible fear interviews always before an asylum officer? And how do you view the role of immigration judges in this process to the extent that you can generalize? Are they ever an advocate? Are they a roadblock? I clerked for the Ninth Circuit. I recall reading some decisions that were pretty alarming to me at that time. That was now over a decade ago. But how do you view their role now in this overall process?
Sure. So the credible fear interview itself is with an asylum officer. And so if an asylum officer issues a negative finding, there is a process for review. So you could go for a review before a judge for that decision. And that's one thing I did. It's a project as well. And it all really depends on your judge. So for example, the second time I was there, the judge I went before, I was prepared by the project that the judge doesn't let the attorney talk. So I had to prepare my client in a manner to make sure that I wasn't allowed to, I didn't even get to say my name on the record. But then the other time I went, I had the better judge who, it was like a mini hearing, or more it was like a direct and a cross-examination kind of to, so there's another process for review, but it really depends on the judge. And I think this could be a whole nother panel, but I think immigration judges are experiencing their own pressures right now as well due to policy changes.
Yes.
So could we hear about like the steps to Albany or what to expect or how to do it or?
Sure. How do people get involved?
So we've been working mainly with law firms to staff up. We're very, very grateful for all the outpouring of support. And we may still have some shifts available towards August. Right now we're full up until about mid-August. And I don't know what the easiest way to get the information. I didn't bring it with me. Right now we have a sign up genius. I think we really are working on our systems. Every day is a new thing. But I think right now we're preparing. So CFIs have started, credible fear interviews have started. So right now the attorneys are meeting with everybody, trying to prepare them for credible fear interviews. We're also trying to do group orientation sessions because we don't know when people are going to be scheduled. So we're trying to get as many people at once. And that's probably going to continue. They've got 2-3 officers doing it every day for 5 days a week. So we're probably getting through 15, 20. A week, well, maybe more, maybe 50. And then after that, we're going to start looking into how to do the redeterminations. We also don't know if as people move out, they've already deported, I think about 20 people. Well, released or deported, but we think deported about 20 people. So we don't know if they're going to keep bringing people from the border as people start cycling out. So the roles are going to change with the attorney. So I think what we're looking towards now is we're preparing people for CFIs and then moving after that, we're going to be preparing people for their redeterminations. We are expecting a lot of denials based on the recent guidance that Hamra mentioned. So we're also going to need to be having people take declarations. We're looking into litigation to push back on that. We're looking to tap into the national litigation efforts and also see if there's anything that makes sense for us to bring locally, since we're in a circuit that hasn't historically ruled a lot on these issues, but tends to have some more favorable law towards detention and such. And then after that, we're going to have to do bond hearings. So there's going to be a lot to do, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I'm like going through the plan in my head as I'm answering your question. But the short answer is, if you have an APCO coordinator in your firm, talk to them. If you don't, come and find me and I will give you my contact information and I will connect you to the people who can help you.
Yes, Amy.
I was curious if, given that we have a lot of law firm representatives here talking about the Rensselaer Sheriff, it does point to how discretion can be used for good or bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether there might be some help that law firms could give independent of representing individuals, which is obviously important and great. But sort of back in the office, are there memos of law or research that people could do to provide guidance documents possibly to give localities guidance on how they could use their discretion depending on how they want to use it?
Yeah, definitely. And so first of all, I just want to say, we're going crazy right now. This is exhausting. This is like, I haven't had a day off in a month since this Albany County jail started, right? I'm sure I don't know when Amanda had a day off too. So, I mean, if you have a thought, all I'm trying to say is if you have a thought, bring it to us. Like, just because we didn't ask doesn't mean that we're not interested. It just probably means like, that's a really great idea. Memos of law, right? I just hadn't thought of it. And I also, maybe don't necessarily have the brain space to think, okay, this is the issue that I would need research. So if you read something and you think, oh, this could be an interesting thing to look into, reach out. Please reach out. If we're not reaching out doesn't mean we're not interested. It just means we haven't thought of it. And yes, I mean, we've been exploring ways to use firms in other ways. So doing research, helping us with memos, helping us think through potential claims. We've also been looking into using support staff from firms, so to help us with data entry, translation, those sort of things, paralegals, and such. And yeah, I mean, we're grateful for the interest and for the commitment that firms have shown, and we really we're eager to work with everyone. This is a very collaborative process. So if you have a thought on something you can do, please reach out, and I just sent out something over APCO this morning. So the only thing is that it's easier for us to have 1 or 2 points of contact, right? Like I work for 200 organizations, and it's just getting a ton of emails doesn't always help. Like I try to answer everyone, but it's not always possible. So that's why we've gone through APCO, but there are other good channels to go through as well. Happy to consider those.
Yeah, we'd be happy at Her Justice to also be kind of a conduit, right? So we can be in touch to help organize this. And just to kind of reiterate and echo that, we're lawyers, this is what we do, and we are working against the government on these issues who has clearly not thought through a lot of this. And for example, on the ACLU action to reunite the children, everyone was asking, including the judge, like, what happens when you don't meet my court order? And asking the ACLU, what is your recommendation for what do we do to the government when they don't comply with my order? And so there's an opportunity there to push forward ideas even the government and the judicial system is grappling with, because this is all new, and even if it is to say it's fining the government, but then it'll be kind of caught up in appeals and things. But we can think collectively to help put forward ideas and solutions and take advantage of the chaos that there is. So again, happy to be the conduit and to help organize this effort.
Thank you. Yeah,
And there are many states' attorney general's offices are actively involved in trying to develop relief to requests in that case.
Also, one other thing that we've found helpful at JFK, if your firms represent clients who may be interested in doing something, like we've had airlines donate tickets because the their council sort of reached out and they donated tickets to have people fly, to reunite with family, stuff like that. That's another thought. But yeah, I've never seen, the government doesn't care about injunctions. It feels like I've never seen. I can't believe we're running our country this way, but they have no plan. They genuinely have no plan, and I know this because the travel ban is a perfect example of that, right? Like they were just like, we're in power now. We're going to sign this executive order. I don't think they ran spell check on the thing, and it went into effect at 10 p.m. because I was on the phone at 8 p.m. when we finally read it with the people at JFK. And I'm like, what's going on? They're like, don't worry, Camille. You know how government works. We're going to get guidance and training. It's going to take months to implement. You have time. We don't want to be doing this either. And then I woke up the next morning and 2 men are detained and I called them back and they're like, yeah, so 10 p.m. last night, we got the word. So I don't think, first of all, don't underestimate how much of a lack of planning is happening right now. Second of all, don't underestimate how much of this is being controlled by Washington. Everything goes back to Washington. And third of all, support the local organizations. I love the ACLU and I'm grateful for everything they have done. But they're not in the Albany County Jail with us. They weren't at JFK. It's groups like Her Justice. It's groups like the small organizations that are really doing the work and that can really use the help and the support. So I'm just going to make that plug too.
Thank you, Camille. We have, I think, another minute for a last-minute question. Anything? Well, I just want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists for their comments and for being the leaders in this and giving us hope. So thank you so much.
My name is Vanessa Lavely, and I am a partner at Cravath and a member of the Junior Advisory Board. And I just wanted to echo Hamra, Ron, Amanda, and Camille. I really appreciate you being here today. It's heartbreaking to hear. I was one of the people whose faces you were probably looking at in the front row. It's so important to hear this and to have lawyers and non-lawyers as part of this effort to try to do what we can every day and to learn the information. So we're really grateful for you being here. And thank you to Hamra and Amy and the rest of the For Justice staff for everything you do. We're honored to be a partner with you guys and to continue doing the work that you do every day. So thank you to everyone for being here on behalf of the For Justice Junior Advisory Board and CAF. Thank you.